The entry is dated February 3rd, 1897. The expedition leader would later cross it out, calling it fatigue-induced paranoia. But the man who wrote it would not live to see spring, and the shadow would appear again. The late 19th century was a brutal age of exploration. Maps were incomplete, compasses lied near the poles, and men still believed that courage alone could conquer the Arctic. The year was 1897, one of the coldest winters on record across the high Arctic. Sea ice thickened earlier than expected, locking ships into place like insects preserved in amber. Darkness lingered longer. Winds howled with a violence that stripped paint from holes and skin from faces. In this frozen world, sound behaved strangely. Voices carried too far. Footsteps vanished instantly, and shadows stretched unnaturally long beneath the low polar sun, sometimes appearing to move independently of the men who cast them. It was into this environment that a small multinational expedition pushed northward, driven by ambition, science, and the unspoken need to leave a mark on a blank map. They would find something else instead, something that left no mark at all. The camp stood on a wide shelf of sea ice near what explorers called Cape Harbinger, a jagged coastal outcropping in the Canadian high Arctic. Tents were half buried by drifting snow, their canvas stiff as boards. Wooden supply crates were stacked into crude windbreaks. A single stove burned whale oil night and day, its smell clinging to everything. The ice beneath them was alive, groaning, shifting, cracking without warning. Sometimes the men swore they could feel it flex beneath their boots, like a vast muscle rolling in its sleep. There were no trees, no birds, no landmarks beyond ice, sky, and distance. It's just white, and the long, crawling shadows it created. Captain Elias, Rourke expedition leader, a veteran Arctic navigator in his early 40s. Rourke had led to previous polar attempts and lost men on both. He was disciplined, reserved, and deeply superstitious, though he would never admit it aloud. He trusted charts and stars, but feared the silence of the ice more than storms. He believed the Arctic watched those who crossed it. Dr. Thomas Holey, naturalist and recorder, 36, thin, sharp-eyed and meticulous, Holey kept daily records of temperature, ice movement, and atmospheric conditions. He believed the Arctic was not empty, but misunderstood. His journals would later become the most disturbing artifacts recovered from the expedition. Samuel Pike, Ice Scout, barely 25. Pike was a sled runner, an advanced scout with exceptional vision. He could spot pressure ridges miles away and read snow like a language. But Pike carried an unspoken fear, he claimed, even before the expedition began, that wide-open ice made him uneasy. "There's nowhere for things to hide," he once said. "And that's what worries me." A quiet Norwegian with weathered hands and a habit of carving small figures from spare wood, home had grown up on stories of northern spirits tales he pretended not to believe, but never mocked. When the shadow appeared, Home was the first to recognize it as familiar. During the polar winter, the sun never rises fully. Instead, it crawls along the horizon, casting light at a shallow angle that stretches every object into distortion. Men appear taller. Sled dogs look monstrous. Even a single pole can cast a shadow that reaches for miles. At first, the explorers blamed the light, but slowly, unease crept into the camp. Shadows began appearing where nothing stood. A dark shape moving parallel to the camp during long treks. A vertical smear on the ice where no ridge existed. A towering silhouette at the edge of vision that vanished when stared at directly. Always distant, always silent, always keeping pace. The first man to mention it openly was Samuel Pike. Returning from a scouting run, Pike stood on the ice shelf staring southward far longer than necessary. His breath came shallow, his face pale beneath layers of frost. Captain Rourke approached him. "What is it?" Rourke asked. Pike hesitated. "Sir, have you ever noticed how shadows don't always belong to something?" Rourke frowned. "Explain this one out there," Pike said quietly, pointing with his mitten. "It moves when we move, stops when we stop. but there's nothing casting it. Rourke followed his gaze. He saw nothing, but something in Pike's voice unsettled him. "Get inside," Rourke ordered. "You've been in the cold too long," Pike obeyed. But that night, he wrote in his private notebook, "The shadow is taller than any man. It crosses pressure ridges without changing shape. It does not stretch like others. It remains whole." As days passed, the ice seemed to swallow sound. Wind died suddenly, without warning. Dogs refused to bark at empty horizons. Footsteps failed to echo where they should have. Dr. Halle noted something odd in his records. Acoustic dampening unusually strong. Sound absorption inconsistent with ice density. He underlined the phrase twice. That same night, Anders Holm awoke suddenly, certain he'd heard something outside the tent. Not a crack, not a wind gust. A slow, heavy movement, like something shifting its weight. When he opened the flap, the world beyond was silent tent, flooded with moonlit ice. But far off, at the edge of vision, something darker than darkness seemed to lean against the horizon. The clearest sign came on January 29th. The men were crossing a flat expanse of ice during a brief window of twilight. The sun hovered low, casting long, warped shadows ahead of them. Dr. Halle stopped walking. "Captain," he said carefully, "count the shadows." Rourke did. There were 5 men, 6 shadows. The 6th was enormous. It ran alongside the others, but did not distort, did not stretch, did not waver. It maintained a constant shape and distance, no matter the terrain. When Rourke stopped, it stopped. When the men moved, it followed. And when Rourke turned to face it, there was nothing there. But the shadow remained. That night, the temperature dropped suddenly by 15 degrees. The ice cracked like gunfire beneath the camp. Dr. Halle recorded one final line before closing his journal. "We are not alone on this ice. Whatever follows us does not hunt like an animal. It waits, it observes, and it is very patient." Outside the tents, under a sky of frozen stars, a massive shadow stretched across the ice, casting no source, making no sound, keeping perfect pace.
What happened here was never fully recorded, and this is only one of many forgotten encounters. Subscribe and continue into the past.
In the Arctic, nothing arrives all at once. The cold does not strike suddenly. It creeps. Darkness does not fall. It lingers, then refuses to leave. So it was with the shadow. At Cape Harbinger, the men did not wake one morning to find themselves hunted. Instead, they noticed small absences, gaps in expectation that accumulated quietly until fear no longer felt like imagination, but like pattern. The first disturbances were subtle enough to dismiss. A crate left outside the supply tent was found, moved several yards, overnight drag marks visible, but no footprints. Captain Rourke blamed wind, though the air had been perfectly still. Anders Holm noticed the crate had been rotated precisely 90 degrees, aligned with the cardinal directions. "Wind doesn't care about direction," Holm muttered. Dr. Halle recorded the incident, but added no speculation. He was still trying to keep the world orderly in ink. More followed. Dog harnesses were discovered unfastened in the morning, though no one admitted touching them. Sled runners showed fresh scuffing, as if something heavy had leaned against them without climbing aboard. Pike reported seeing a pressure ridge collapse hours after they passed. It no sound, no cracking, simply settling inward, like a breath released. "The ice is following us," Pike said one evening, half joking. No one laughed. On February 6th, Anders Holm found footprints. They were not human. They were not animal. They appeared as broad depressions in the snow-elongated ovals, spaced too far apart for a man to evenly place for a bear. Each impression was deep, as if something heavy had pressed down deliberately, then lifted straight up. No drag, no scuff, no shuffle, just weight and absence. The prints formed a loose arc around the camp, stopping at equal distances, like markers. Holm counted them twice. When he reached the end, he realized they did not approach the tents. They circled them. Captain Rourke ordered the snow disturbed and the prints erased. He did not want men staring at patterns in the dark. But Pike noticed something unsettling. When the wind smoothed the ice later that night, the arc reappeared, faintly depressions, returning where none should exist. As if something remembered where it had stood. That night, Home finally spoke. He waited until the stove hissed low and the men were huddled close, their breath fogging the canvas walls. "In my village," he said quietly, "there are stories they tell children when the sun leaves for too long." Rourke stiffened. "We don't need stories." Home nodded. "I know, but the stories are older than us." He described a presence known in scattered northern folklore, a thing without shape, seen only as shadow. Not a beast, not a spirit, but something that reflected those who crossed the ice. "It does not chase," Home said. "It walks with you. It learns how you move. And when you are weak enough, when the cold has taken most of you, it closes the distance." Pike swallowed hard. "Does it kill?" Home hesitated. "Some stories say it replaces." No one asked what that meant. Dr. Holly wrote that night by lantern light, his pen scratching fast, his breath uneven. Local folklore describes a shadow entity associated with prolonged ice travel. Common elements: imitation, persistence, silence. He paused, then added, "Correlation does not imply causation." But the ink trembled. 2 days later, Holla made a discovery that unsettled even Captain Roll. While checking the ice near an old pressure ridge, he uncovered a half-buried notebook sealed in oilcloth. The paper inside was brittle but legible, preserved by cold. The name on the first page read, H.M. Collins, Surveyor. 1873, an expedition no one in the camp had heard of. The journal entries were sparse, practical, and abruptly ended. But one passage, written in a cramped hand, stood out. "The shadow remains regardless of sun angle. It grows clearer when we grow tired. It does not wish to be seen. It wishes to be followed." Another entry, days later, "We lost Jensen today. He stepped away from the line." The shadow did not follow him back. The final page contained only a single sentence: "When it stands still, do not move." There was no record of Collins or his team returning south. Rourke ordered the journal stored away. Halley copied every word before doing so. By mid-February, the men no longer denied seeing it. It appeared during long marches, always on the periphery, ever ahead, never behind. A vertical darkness, sliding across the ice, unaffected by terrain, scale, or light. When Pike altered course suddenly, the shadow adjusted without delay. When the men stopped, it stopped. It stopped. When Rourke fired a flare into the sky, the shadow vanished only to reappear minutes later at the same distance. Closer now. Still silent. Still massive. Dr. Holly attempted measurements, sketching angles and distances, trying to prove it was an optical illusion. But the data refused to align. Shadows should stretch. This one did not. Shadows should distort. This one remained whole. Shadows should disappear when the light shifts. This one waited. At night, the Arctic is not silent. Ice pops, wind sighs, snow whispers across itself. But new sounds crept into the dark. A low, rhythmic compression beneath the ice, like something shifting its weight slowly, carefully. A distant scrape that did not echo. A sense of pressure, as if the air itself were being displaced. Pike awoke one night, certain something stood outside his tent. He did not open the flap. He did not call out. He listened. Whatever was there did not breathe. But it paused when he shifted, matched his stillness, then moved on. Fear did not arrive as panic. It arrived as discipline taken too far. Rourke enforced tighter marching formations. No one walked alone. No one stepped offline. Men were ordered not to look directly at the horizon for too long. "If you don't acknowledge it," he said, "it remains a trick of the light." But even Rourke began waking in the night, convinced something stood where the tent wall bowed inward. Holly stopped recording temperatures after his readings, began fluctuating without explanation. Warm pockets appearing briefly beneath the ice, then vanishing. Home carved no more figures. Pike spoke less, watching the ice instead of the sky. The shadow no longer frightened them. It exhausted them. On February 14th, during a brief clearing, the men saw it clearly for the first time. Not directly, but reflected. The low sun caught the ice at an angle, creating a mirror-like sheen across a frozen lead. In that reflection, behind the men, stood a towering silhouette, broad, vertical, impossibly tall. Its outline was not sharp. It shimmered like heat distortion in reverse. And when Pike turned suddenly, the reflection vanished. But the ice beneath their feet creaked in response, a slow, deliberate sound. Dr. Halley wrote that night, "The entity, if it can be called, that responds to attention. It does not retreat, it adjusts." The dogs began whining softly, their ears flat, eyes fixed on the ice beyond camp. No amount of soothing calmed them. Then, one by one, they lay down, flat, still, as if waiting. Pike stepped outside and stared into the half-light. The shadow was closer, not much closer than ever before. Still distant, still silent, but unmistakably nearer. And for the first time since the expedition began, Pike felt certain of something he could not explain. It was no longer content to follow. It was waiting for a moment. A mistake. A single man to fall out of step in polar expeditions. There is a moment when speculation collapses under the weight of experience. Wind theories, folklore, and fatigue give way to something undeniable. For the men at Cape Harbinger, that moment arrived not with a scream, nor a sudden attack, but with a realization far more terrifying. The shadow was no longer distant. It was close enough to interact, and it chose its moment carefully. February 18th began with deceptive calm. The wind fell away entirely, leaving the Arctic unnaturally still. The horizon sharpened into a clean, merciless line. Every sound, the scrape of boots, the creak of sled runners, seemed amplified, echoing across the ice longer than it should have. Captain Rourke ordered a short recon march eastward, hoping movement would steady the men's nerves. The shadow had remained visible at distance for days now, and Rourke believed motion might restore a sense of control. They moved in tight formation. 5 men, 5 sleds, 1 shadow. Samuel Pike walked point, eyes scanning ahead. Dr. Hawley followed close behind, notebook secured beneath his coat. Anders Holm brought up the rear, glancing back far more often than necessary. The shadow slid along the ice, parallel to them, closer than ever before. Still silent. Still wrong. The first sign of change came when Pike stopped abruptly. Rourke nearly collided with him. "What is it?" Pike didn't answer. He was staring at the ice beneath his boots. They're perfectly imprinted in the hard snow. Was a depression that mirrored his stance, one foot slightly turned, weight resting heavier on the left leg. But Pike had not stepped there. Dr. Hawley knelt to examine it. The impression was deep, deliberate, as if something had pressed down slowly, testing weight, then lifted again. "It's copying us," Pike whispered. "Not our shadows, us." Before anyone could respond, Holm spoke from behind. It made a mistake. They turned. For the first time since its appearance, the shadow had not stopped when they did. It had moved past them. Only a few yards. But that was enough. The Arctic light shifted subtly as the shadow halted ahead of them. It no longer clung to the ice. It rose. Not suddenly. Not violently. Slowly, deliberately, its vertical form, separating from the ground, stretching upward, until it stood taller than any man present. The darkness thickened, becoming denser than shadow should allow. It had depth now. Volume. Presence. Rourke raised his rifle, hands trembling. "Don't," Holly whispered urgently. "If it reacts to attention too late." The shadow turned. Not with limbs, not with joints, but with intention. Its shape rotated, orienting itself toward the men. The air around it seemed to dim, light bending strangely at its edges. Pike felt his stomach drop. For the first time, the shadow had acknowledged them. The shadow advanced. Not quickly, not aggressively. It glided forward across the ice without disturbing snow, pressure ridges, or reflection. No crunch, no scrape, no echo. It moved as though the ice itself carried it. Home backed away instinctively. The shadow stopped, matched his distance exactly. Hale's voice shook as he spoke, almost to himself. "It's measuring us." Rourke swallowed hard. "Measuring what?" "Reaction," Hale replied. "Fear, distance, movement." Pike took a step sideways. The shadow mirrored the movement perfectly. Left for left, right for right, right for right. A flawless echo. Then the shadow did something none of them expected. It leaned, its upper mass tilted slightly forward, as if peering down at Pike. The motion was curious, not hostile examination, rather than a threat. Pike's breath hitched. The shadow did not breathe, but it paused, exactly as Pike did. A moment stretched between the men, an absence, locked in silent imitation. Then Pike whispered, "Captain." The shadow twitched. Just once. Not sound, movement, but response. Dr. Hale's blood ran cold. It hurt him. What followed defied everything the men understood about sound. There was no noise, no echo, no vibration. Yet each of them felt something pass through the air like pressure, shifting inside the skull. A word, not spoken aloud, but understood. "Walk." Pike staggered back, Rourke's vision blurred. Holmes dropped to one knee, clutching his head. Holly scribbled one word in his notebook before his hands began to shake too badly to continue. Communication? The shadow did not repeat itself. It did not advance. It simply waited. Rourke made the worst decision of the expedition in that moment. "Fall back," he ordered. The men moved, and the shadow moved with them. Still parallel, still matched. But something changed. In its shape it grew more defined, edges sharpening slightly, height adjusting as though correcting itself. Then Samuel Pike stumbled. Just once. His boot caught on a pressure crack. That was enough. The shadow stopped mirroring the group and moved directly toward him. Pike screamed. The shadow did not lunge. It extended not an arm, not a limb, but a tapering edge of darkness that reached toward Pike's shoulder. The air grew suddenly colder. Frost crystallized instantly along Pike's coat sleeve. Holmes grabbed Pike and dragged him backward. The shadow recoiled, not in pain, in surprise, as if the concept of resistance was new. Hale shouted, "It doesn't understand interference." The shadow paused again, adjusted, then shifted its attention not to Pike, but to Holmes. Holmes froze. "I've seen this before," he whispered hoarsely. "In stories. It takes the one who knows it." The shadow leaned closer. Its surface rippled faintly, like wind moving through smoke. Then it stepped back. The contact ended, but something remained. Pike collapsed, sobbing, his sleeve rigid with ice, where the shadow had nearly touched him. And in the silence that followed, every man knew the truth. It had tested them, and it had learned something. Rourke ordered an immediate return to camp. No arguments, no delay. The march back felt longer than the entire expedition thus far. The shadow followed at a respectful distance now, no longer mirroring, no longer pretending. It had no need to. At camp, Holly checked Pike's arm. The fabric was frozen solid, but beneath it, Pike's skin was unmarked. No frostbite, no injury, just cold, deeper than cold. Pike stared at his arm and whispered, "It knows where I am now." No one contradicted him. That night, as the men huddled inside their tents, the shadow did not appear on the ice. Instead, it appeared somewhere else, inside the camp, not as a shape, but as absence. The dogs whimpered, eyes tracking something unseen, moving between the tents. Frost formed in places untouched by wind. The stove flame guttered without cause. Then, from just beyond the canvas wall, something paused. And for the first time since the expedition began, Captain Rourke felt it unmistakably. The shadow was no longer outside with them. It was inside their perimeter, watching, waiting, learning. By the time the shadow crossed the boundary of the camp, Captain Elias Rourke understood that the expedition had entered a different phase of survival. Up until that moment, whatever followed them had remained a companion, at distance, silent, observant, content to match pace and posture. Now, it had done something far more deliberate. It had changed the rules. The first night after the encounter was the coldest yet. Temperatures plunged without warning, far below even Arctic expectations. The stove burned hotter, yet the air inside the tents felt brittle, sharp enough to sting the lungs. Frost crept inward across canvas walls in branching patterns that resembled veins or cracks in old glass. Rourke ordered the tents pulled closer together, supplies stacked into a tighter ring. The men were to stay within arm's reach of one another at all times. No wandering, he said quietly. No checking the perimeter alone. Dr. Hawley noted how strange that sounded. Checking a perimeter against something that left no tracks and cast no shape. Samuel Pike sat wrapped in blankets, staring at his frozen sleeve. The fabric had thawed, but he swore the cold remained beneath his skin, deeper than flesh. "It didn't touch me," he said hoarsely. "It measured me." No one asked how he knew. The next day brought clear skies and endless white dawn on paper. Conditions were ideal for movement, but no one suggested traveling. The shadow no longer followed at a distance. Instead, it appeared intermittently, never where expected. Never for long. A vertical darkness would slide across the ice far to the north, then vanish. Minutes later, it would reappear to the west, closer than before. It was not teleporting. It was repositioning. Dr. Hawley realized this while studying angles in his notebook. "It's anticipating us," he said. "Not reacting. Anticipating." "How?" Rourke asked. Hawley hesitated. "Because it knows how we think. We taught it. They had shown it formation, shown it pace, shown it hesitation. The shadow had learned human movement. Now it was learning human decision." Rourke was a practical man. If the threat could be learned, it could be tested. He ordered Holm to rig lanterns around the camp at irregular intervals, hoping light might disrupt whatever allowed the shadow to maintain form. Pike was tasked with walking control routes outside the tents, while Hawley recorded any changes in the shadow's behavior. The results were unsettling. When Pike altered his gait, deliberately limping, dragging his foot, the shadow mirrored the change. Minutes later, when Holm moved backward without turning, the shadow rotated its orientation rather than retreating. And when Rourke ordered everyone to stop moving entirely, the shadow did not. It continued forward alone. That was the moment Rourke realized it no longer needed imitation to advance. Sound returned to the Arctic at night, but not the sounds the men expected. There was no wind, no ice cracking. Instead, the men heard a low, rhythmic compression beneath the camp, deep, slow, and steady, like pressure applied and released. Hawley compared it to footsteps without impact. Holick called it weight. Pike woke screaming one night, convinced something stood at the foot of his bedroll. When Rourke shook him awake, Pike could only point at the frost pattern on the tent wall. It was taller than before. The pattern resembled a standing figure. On February 21st, Hawley made a discovery that chilled him more than the cold. He found his notebook moved, not stolen, not damaged, simply relocated, placed carefully atop a supply crate, open to the page describing the shadow's ability to mirror movement. Someone or something had selected the page. Hawley said nothing at first. He watched the others, looking for signs of guilt or fear. There were none. Later, Pike found his compass needle jammed permanently north, refusing to move, even when struck. Holm discovered one of his carved wooden figures, missing only to find it later standing upright on the ice several yards from camp, facing inward, toward them. Men began to distrust stillness. Any pause felt dangerous. Any silence too long invited attention. Holmes started muttering to himself at night, repeating old Norwegian prayers meant to confuse spirits. Hawley snapped at Pike for walking too softly. Rourke caught himself counting shadows even when the sun was gone. Sleep came in fragments. Dreams came whole. Several men reported the same nightmare independently. standing alone on the ice while a shadow stretched beside them, not touching, not threatening, just waiting for them to fall behind. The shadow never chased in the dreams. It waited. Believing the shadow might be tied to the ice itself, Rourke ordered a survey of the nearby pressure ridges. If the phenomena was environmental, they needed to understand the terrain it favored. The men moved cautiously, roped together. Holly noticed something almost immediately. Sound behaved differently near certain ridges. Voices dulled. Footsteps vanished. Even breathing felt muted. "It's like sound is being absorbed," he said, not reflected. Pike knelt and pressed his ear to the ice. He pulled back instantly. "There's space under there," he whispered. "Not water. Space." Holmes crossed himself. The shadow appeared, then rising behind a distant ridge, tall and narrow, its edges shimmering faintly. It did not approach. It observed. As they retreated, Haley realized the shadow was no longer matching them exactly. It was taking shorter routes. That night, Rourke decided to test the one variable they had not yet tried: noise. He fired his rifle into the sky. The report echoed sharply too, sharply rolling across the ice like a physical wave. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the shadow reacted. It expanded, not outward, but upward, its vertical form stretching higher than ever before, blotting out stars behind it. And then it produced something new. A sound. Not a roar. Not a scream. A low, hollow vibration that resonated through the ice and into the men's bones. It felt like standing too close to a massive engine pressure without volume. The men dropped to their knees instinctively. Holly wrote later that it was the first time the shadow had asserted itself, not as a reflection, but as a presence. By morning, the camp was surrounded, not physically, symbolically, around the perimeter. In a wide circle, the ice had changed, texture compressed, smoothed, as if something heavy had stood there repeatedly. No footprints, no marks of entry, just a ring of altered ice. Holmes stared at it for a long time. "In the stories," he said quietly, "this means the boundary is closed." Rourke asked. "Closed? To what?" Holmes did not answer. The final escalation came after sunset. The men sat in silence, listening to the familiar compression beneath the ice. Then something new joined it. A second rhythm, out of sync with the first. Closer. Pike's face drained of color. "There's more than one," he whispered. The stove flame guttered. Shadows shifted across the tent walls, too many, overlapping, indistinct. And from just beyond the canvas, something paused. Not the massive shadow. Something smaller, more precise. A shape leaned toward the tent wall, its outline briefly visible as the fabric bowed inward. Then it withdrew, and the larger shadow moved. For the first time since its appearance, it began to circle the camp deliberately, slowly, methodically, testing distance, testing reactions. Haley wrote one final line before closing his journal for the night. "The shadow has stopped following. It is preparing." Outside, the Arctic fell completely silent, and whatever waited on the ice was no longer patient. The Arctic does not announce catastrophe. It allows it to arrive quietly, as though violence was simply another natural state, no more remarkable than snowfall or night. At Cape Harbinger, the attack did not begin with motion. It began with sound. The compression beneath the ice deepened after sunset, no longer rhythmic, no longer patient. It came in uneven, like weight shifting from one foot to another, then stopping, then resuming somewhere else. Captain Rourke ordered all men inside the central tent. "No lights outside," he said. "No voices unless necessary." The dogs lay flat and unmoving, eyes fixed on the canvas wall, not barking, not growling, listening. Dr. Holly noticed something immediately wrong. The stove flame burned steadily, yet the tent grew colder by the minute. Heat was being drawn away, not dispersed, taken. It came from the east. Not a shadow this time, a distortion. The ice itself seemed to darken, as though pressed downward by something vast. Invisible mass, flattening the surface without breaking it. Snow compressed. Frost lines radiated outward. Samuel Pike whispered, "It's standing right there." No one argued. The tent wall bowed inward slightly, not from wind, but from proximity something tall enough to displace air. Then the compression shifted. Another weight answered from the south. Then another. Dr. Hale's voice shook. "There's more than one," Anders Holm murmured. "Or one thing. Learning to be many." The next sound was impossible to ignore. A long, drawn scrape across the ice, too slow for movement, too heavy for drift. It circled the camp deliberately, tracing the perimeter the shadow had marked earlier. The sound stopped at each tent, paused, moved on. Rourke gripped his rifle so tightly his fingers numbed. "It's counting," Pike whispered. Before anyone could respond, the scrape returned, this time closer, louder, accompanied by a faint vibration beneath their boots. Then something touched the tent. Not struck, touched. The canvas dimpled inward, as if pressed by a broad, weightless surface. No claw, no hand, just pressure. The tent wall slowly rebounded. Holm whispered, "It's learning where we are." The scream came from outside. Not human, but not animal either. It was a sound of displacement, a sudden release of air forced through something too large to contain it. The ice beneath the camp groaned in answer. Rourke shouted, "Everyone, stay down!" Too late. One of the supply tents collapsed outward as if pulled from above. Crates skidded across the ice. Ropes snapped. Something had reached down, but nothing was seen. Only the aftermath. Pike bolted from the central tent, panic overriding discipline. "Don't," Rourke shouted. The shadow reacted instantly. The ice beneath Pike did not crack. It opened, not visibly, but functionally. Pike's feet left the surface without warning, his body rising as if lifted by unseen hands. He screamed, kicking wildly, his breath fogging violently in the air. The shadow did not rush him. It enveloped him. Darkness thickened around his torso, swallowing sound, swallowing motion. For a brief, horrifying second, Pike hung, suspended, half visible within a vertical smear of shadow. Then he was gone. No blood, no struggle, just absence. The ice beneath settled as though nothing had happened. Rourke stood frozen. Hale's journal fell from his hands. Holm whispered, "It doesn't tear. It removes."
What happened here was never fully recorded, and this is only one of many forgotten encounters. Subscribe and continue into the past.
The camp exploded into panic. Men shouted. Rifles fired blindly into darkness. Flares arced into the sky, casting wild, broken light across the ice. For the first time, the shadow fragmented, not retreating, dividing. Shadows stretched and separated, sliding independently across the illuminated ice. Each moved with purpose, no longer mirroring, no longer passive. They had learned enough. A flare landed near one shadow. It recoiled not from light, but from proximity, its shape thinning, pulling back, reforming several yards away. Rourke barked orders. "Keep moving. Stay together." But movement no longer helped. The shadows adjusted. They cut angles. They predicted. Anders Holm tried to reach the dogs. He never made it. A shadow rose behind him, taller than before, broader, its edges unstable, shifting constantly as though deciding which form to maintain. Holm turned. He did not scream. He simply dropped his knife and whispered something in Norwegian, a word that Hole later translated as recognition. The shadow leaned. Holm's shadow detached from his feet. That was when the men understood. The thing was not removing bodies. It was removing alignment. Holm collapsed as though gravity had changed direction. His body slid sideways across the ice, not pulled, not dragged. De-erected. Then he was swallowed by shadow. Gone. The dogs broke their silence, then howling wildly, straining against their lines. Rourke fired again. The shadow did not react. Rourke realized the truth too late. This was not an attack meant to kill them all. It was selective, deliberate. The shadows moved toward those who hesitated, those who recognized patterns, those who resisted too slowly or too thoughtfully. It left a loud. It took the observant. Dr. Hollis stumbled backward, clutching his journal, eyes wide. "It knows who we are," he gasped. "It's choosing." Rourke grabbed him. "Move." They ran. The ice beneath them shifted, no cracks, no sound, just subtle changes in resistance, as if the surface itself were guiding movement. One shadow surged ahead, cutting off their path. Another followed behind. They were being herded. The sound of many, the Arctic filled with noise, then not wind, not storm but layered compression, overlapping displacements of mass. The shadows moved together now, coordinating without signal or sound. Rourke felt pressure in his skull, like altitude sickness reversed. Haley clutched his head. "It's too close. I can feel it thinking." They reached the ridge edged, the same ridge where the shadow had first been reflected days earlier. The ice narrowed. Movement became limited. The shadows closed. Rourke shoved Haley toward the ridge slope. "Go. Don't stop." Haley hesitated just long enough. A shadow passed through him. Not around. Through? Haley screamed, not in pain, but in disorientation as his body twisted unnaturally, his silhouette lagging behind his motion. Rourke reached for him. Too late. Hale's form blurred, darkened, then thinned until only a smear remained pressed into the ice like ink absorbed by paper. The journal fell. Rourke grabbed it and ran. Behind him, the shadows regrouped, taller now, steadier, less diffuse. They had learned something essential. Only 3 men remained. Rourke did not look back again. He ran until his lungs burned, until his boots bled, until the sound beneath the ice faded into distance. When he finally collapsed, the Arctic was silent once more. No shadow followed. No sound remained. The camp was gone, not destroyed, erased. Behind him, the ice lay smooth and unbroken. No sign of struggle. No sign of bodies, only faint distortions where shadows had once stood, and somewhere far behind, just beyond the reach of sight, something enormous adjusted its shape. Satisfied. The attack is complete. The entity reveals intent, but not form. The expedition is broken. The survivors are few. Rourke ran until the idea of direction dissolved. The ridge fell away into a broad, featureless plain where the ice shone like bone under a low, bleached sun. Wind returned in sharp gusts, carrying needles of snow that erased footprints as quickly as they formed. Behind him, the sounds of the camp gunshots, collapsing canvas. The layered pressure beneath the ice thinned and vanished. Silence returned. Not relief. Silence as condition. Rourke slowed only when his legs threatened to fold. He dropped to one knee, gasping, the cold burning his lungs. He waited for the shadow to appear alongside him to keep pace, as it always had. It did not. For the first time since Cape Harbinger, he was alone. That realization frightened him more than pursuit ever could. Rourke rose and turned, scanning the horizon. The world was empty in every direction. A flawless expanse of white and pale sky. He counted the living in his head, as if doing so might anchor them in place. Samuel Pike taken. Anders Holm taken. Dr. Thomas Hole taken. 3 men erased without wound or trace. There had been others earlier in the season, names blurred by time and snow. Now only Rourke remained, carrying Hale's journal pressed to his chest like a fragile organ. He checked his compass. The needle wavered, then settled north, as always. He laughed once, a short, broken sound, and started walking. Hours passed, or perhaps minutes. Time had loosened its grip. Rourke felt watched, not from behind, but from within the landscape itself. The ice beneath his boots seemed denser in places, softer in others, as if the surface was subtly guiding him along a preferred route. He stopped. The wind died. The light shifted, and then he saw it not as a shape, not as a silhouette, but as a difference. A place where the air appeared heavier, where light dimmed without casting a line. It stood several hundred yards away, immense and still. The shadow did not move. It did not approach. It waited. Rourke's heart hammered. He raised his rifle, then lowered it again. He understood now what Holly had tried to explain, that this thing reacted to intention, to recognition. To be acknowledged was to be measured. Rourke turned and walked away. The difference in the air remained where it was. Watching, night arrived as a slow suffocation of color. Rourke found a shallow depression and pitched a single tent, with hands numb enough to fumble every knot. He burned a ration candle and read Hale's journal by its trembling light. The entries grew more fragmented near the end. The shadow is not singular. It is a rule. Where alignment breaks, it enters. Another line, scrawled and underlined until the paper thinned. It removes a delay between intention and consequence. Rourke closed the journal and sat listening. The wind returned in low moans, but beneath it he sensed something else, a pressure without rhythm, like mass held in place by choice. He did not sleep. Near dawn, the candle guttered. Rourke felt it before he saw it, the subtle thickening of the air, the way breath seemed to linger longer than it should. He opened the tent flap and stepped out. The shadow was closer now. Not close enough to touch, close enough to matter. It had no edge, no face, no limb. It rose from the ice as a vertical absence, towering and patient. The light bent around it, not casting a shadow so much as being refused passage. Rourke stood straight, refusing to lower his gaze. "I won't follow," he said aloud, surprised to hear his voice hold. The shadow did nothing. He took a step back. The shadow adjusted not to mirror him, but to maintain distance. A perfect, measured correction. Rourke understood then that escape was not a matter of speed or direction. It was a matter of time. The shadow did not hurry, because it did not need to. It was not constrained by fatigue, hunger, or error. It waited for misalignment, for weakness, for the moment a man fell out of step with himself. The ground beneath Rourke shifted, not cracking, not breaking, softening. His boots sank slightly, as if the ice had accepted additional weight. He froze. The shadow did not advance. It leaned, not forward, down, as if studying the surface where Rourke stood. The pressure beneath his boot increased. He felt a tug at his balance, a subtle insistence. Rourke remembered the final line from Colin's journal, the one Hale had copied and underlined. "When it stands still, do not move." Rourke did not move. Minutes passed. The wind screamed. Snow stung his eyes. His legs shook with cold and strain. The pressure eased. The ice firmed. The shadow receded by a fraction. Rourke exhaled. That was when it happened. The sound came from his left, a faint, hollow compression, like a step taken without impact. Rourke turned his head without moving his feet. The shadow split, not into two shapes, into two presences. One remained where it was. The other appeared closer, offset at an angle that cut across Rourke's line of sight. A trap made of patience. Rourke's balance faltered. For the briefest instant, he leaned. The ice accepted the change. His shadow detached, not tearing away, sliding, as if delayed by a fraction of time. Rourke felt a lurch in his chest, a sensation like vertigo turned inward. He screamed and forced himself upright. The detached shadow rejoined his feet with a soft, impossible click. The presences withdrew, not defeated, satisfied. They had learned how close they could come. Rourke walked until the sun rose fully and the shadows shortened into manageable shapes. When he reached the edge of known routes, he collapsed, delirious and half-frozen. Days later, a rescue party found him wandering, barefoot, his boots discarded, miles back along a straight, inexplicable line. He spoke little. When he did, he said only this: "It follows alignment. Break that, and it enters." The rescuers found no camp at Cape Harbinger, no debris, no tracks. The ice was smooth and unbroken, as though no human activity had ever occurred there at all. Only one thing was recovered: Dr. Hale's journal, pressed flat into the ice, as if placed there deliberately. Rourke lived another 12 years. He never returned north. He refused to stand near large open spaces. He slept with a light burning. In winter, he avoided snowfields and frozen lakes, crossing them only at night when shadows were shortest. In his final days, he wrote a letter no one opened until after his death. It is not a creature. It is a correction. Where men impose pattern on the ice, it restores balance. He never explained what balance meant, and the Arctic kept its silence. What happened at Cape Harbinger in the winter of 1897 never received an official name, never entered textbooks, and never settled into a single explanation. Instead, it scattered cross reports, rumors, marginal notes, and the quiet behavior of those who survived long enough to remember. And yet, when the fragments are placed together, a pattern remains. The expedition was formally declared lost in March of 1897. Newspapers across Europe and North America carried brief notices. Arctic Party fails to return ice conditions, blamed at times. London Northern Expedition ends in tragedy. New York Herald, the official report, cited extreme cold, ice instability, and disorientation caused by polar conditions. No evidence of violence was recorded. No mention was made of shadows, distortions, or unexplained disappearances. Captain Elias Rourke's testimony was deemed incoherent due to exposure. His statements were summarized, simplified, and archived. Most of what he said never reached print. Internal expedition correspondence tells a different story. In a private memorandum circulated among Arctic researchers months after the incident, one line appears repeatedly, crossed out and rewritten in different hands. Absence of tracks inconsistent with lost scenario. Rescue teams noted that equipment was missing without signs of removal. Campsites appeared undisturbed rather than destroyed. No remains were found, no clothing, no blood, no indication of collapse beneath the ice. It is as though the men were never present, save for the knowledge that they should have been. Dr. Thomas Hale's journal was quietly sealed and classified under psychological irregularities. It would not be released publicly for nearly 70 years. When it was, several pages were missing. Hale's surviving notes circulated briefly among glaciologists in the 1960s. Dismissed at the time as the product of isolation and fear, but one entry continues to trouble modern researchers. We mistake it for a follower because it keeps pace. But pace is not pursuit, it is calibration. Hale never described the shadow as hostile, only corrective. That distinction would later reappear in unrelated Arctic accounts. Long before Cape Harbinger appeared on European maps, Inuit oral traditions warned of something that moved across the ice without sound or shape. Not a spirit, not an animal. A presence described only as the one that restores spacing. Elders spoke of hunters who walked too far from their companions. Men who believed themselves alone, only to find their shadows behaving strangely, delaying, stretching, or slipping out of alignment. Those hunters did not always die. Sometimes they returned, changed, quieter, less certain of where they stood. One elder explained it this way: the ice does not like crowds or emptiness. When either grows too great, it adjusts. European explorers dismissed such stories as metaphor. They would not be the last to do so. Over the next century, accounts of a moving shadow appeared sporadically across polar regions. 1908, Franz Joseph Land, a Russian surveyor, noted a vertical darkness moving parallel to his party for 2 days, disappearing when they stopped marching. 1934, East Greenland, a Danish expedition reported loss of one man without sound or track, preceded by reports of shadows that did not match sun angle. 1957, Beaufort Sea Ice. A Canadian weather station logged unexplained pressure changes beneath stable ice and visual distortions during low sun. Each incident was treated independently. None referenced the others. Yet the descriptions aligned too closely to be coincidence. Contemporary scientists have proposed explanations ranging from optical phenomena to rare atmospheric refraction. Others suggest neurological effects caused by prolonged exposure to monotone environments. These theories explain seeing a shadow. They do not explain interaction. They do not explain removal without disturbance. They do not explain how multiple expeditions, separated by decades and geography, reported the same behavior, matching pace, maintaining distance, advancing only when alignment broke. And none explained why survivors often altered their behavior permanently afterward. In 1909, 3 years before his death, Elias Rourke wrote a final letter to a fellow explorer. It was never published. We thought we were mapping emptiness. But emptiness has rules. The thing we saw was not hunting us. It was correcting the error of our presence. Rourke never clarified what error meant. Only that the Arctic, once disturbed, does not forget. Today, Cape Harbinger remains rarely visited. Not forbidden. Not officially dangerous. Just avoided. Modern satellite imagery shows nothing unusual. No anomalous heat signatures. No visible distortions. The ice appears ordinary, flat, quiet, indifferent. But guides who travel near the region tell their clients a simple rule. Never walk alone on open ice. Never stop moving suddenly. And never follow a shadow that keeps perfect pace. Some laugh at the advice. Others do not. Was the shadow a being, a force, a process, or merely the Arctic responding to imbalance the way the body responds to infection? No record answers that question. Only patterns remain. And patterns, as Halley once wrote, are how the ice speaks. Some explorers say the Arctic is empty. Others say it is alive. But those who have walked too long across open ice will tell you something different. It watches how well you stay in step. If you enjoyed this historical encounter, subscribe for more stories from the past, where forgotten expeditions, hidden records, and the silent wilderness still hold truths that were never meant to follow us home.